Hello, my name is Keegan, and I'm going to be talking about historical racism for my topic for my final assignment. Uh, I did write everything down and look through the book and pick topics to talk about. I picked five topics and I put examples for each topic. So my first topic is the transatlantic slave trade. It was the forced migration and enslavement of millions of Africans by European powers and its long-term impact on black communities worldwide. For my example, I said between the 16th and 19th centuries, millions of Africans were captured, sold, and transported across the Atlantic to work as slaves in the Americas. Um, One major port involved was, I don't know if I can say this word right, Amenia uh, castle in the present day Ghana used by European traders. I got all my information from the book and a few offline just so I could go a little bit into more depth about my topics that I chose. Um, my second one is colonialism and racial hierarchies. It was European colonial powers imposed racial classifications to dominate indigenous peoples in Africa, Asia, and the Americas. My example was in British rule India, colonial authorities often treated Indians as racial inferior. British officers lived in segregated areas and enforced policies that prioritized white Europeans in jobs, education, and law. My next topic was the Jim Crow laws and segregation. I talked a lot about this in history and in English. Uh, so it said legalized racial segregation in the U.S. after slavery ended, especially in the South, which enforced inequality in education, housing, and voting. I know at some point in time, um, there was talked about that the Jim Crow laws were being very big in Mississippi in this generation now. Um, So I said in the U.S., Black Americans were legally forced to attend separate and often inferior schools. As one of the examples, the 1896 P- Plessy versus Ferguson Supreme Court decisions upheld separate but equal segregation. I talked a lot about this with my English teacher because we really went into depth at the end of the semester about history in Black or African American people. Um, My fourth one was the apartheid in South Africa. It was a system of institutionalized racial segregation and discrimination enforced by law from 1948 to the early 1990s. My example was under apartheid, black South Africans were not allowed to vote, had to carry pass books to move around, and were forcibly relocated from their homes. Nelson Mandela was in prison for 27 years for opposing this system. Um, and my last topic that I'm gonna be talking about with historical racism was the scientific racism, and um, it was basically science to justify racial superiority, inferiority, and policies like forced sterilization and segregation. My example was in the early 2000s. In the early 20th century, the U.S. and other countries promoted um how to say this word, eugenics, I suppose, claiming that certain races were biologically superior. This led to forced sterilization, especially of black, Indonesians, and disabled people. I feel that the historical racism is most like coming back in this generation because I know at some point in time we did have a lot of racism going on. With Trump and the way that some African Americans didn't like the things that he was doing, and how it really came back to hunters when we elected him president again. I'm not really gonna go into depth with that, uh, to not get off topic, but I know that I had to deal with a few racial people at my old job. So I kind of see that the racism is really impacting this generation, and I feel like everybody should really just be equal because we all share the same blood, uh, smell the same air, look at the same thing. We all got same eyes, same bones, spine, everything. So I feel like when I went and more into depth of historical racism, I kind of feel like African Americans didn't really have. We was like mostly objects of the world when it came to racism. Like they could just pick us up and we could just move on, and we had no say so into it until we finally defended ourselves. Consequences were made. Uh, but if we didn't defend ourselves, who knows what we would have been right now? I probably wouldn't even be able to be walking the streets or driving a car or getting the education I needed, or just as a woman, it was really big as a black female. But that is the end of my video about historical racism. All I want to say is I want to leave like a little positive farewell. Um, I really enjoyed being in your class, even though I missed a couple classes because I was going through some personal issues and being sick, and I'm still sick now. Um, but I really enjoy being in class. I learned a lot. I really pay attention when it comes to my history, so I can get more in depth in how I could teach my kids, depending on how the school system is going to go throughout the years. But I just want to say, have a good summer. Um, More blessings to come your way. Um, and yeah, thank you so much for having me in your classroom. See you next semester, hopefully. Bye.